Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. We're going to be presenting a multi-presentational breakdown of the FBAR and everything about it, essentially, especially with so much going on these days with foreign account reporting, the globalization of the US economy, with an FBAR case actually going to the Supreme Court. FBAR can be overwhelming, but if you break it down into bite-sized pieces, it's not that bad. So let's go through the basics and start with today's presentation, which is simply who has to go ahead and file the FBAR, who is considered a U.S. person. By way of background, the FBAR refers to Foreign Bank and Financial Account Reporting. Technically, it's filed on a FinCEN form, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the form is FinCEN Form 114. FBAR refers to Foreign Bank and Financial Account Reporting. U.S. persons are required to report their foreign bank and financial accounts on the FBAR. It's an electronic form. Technically, it's due on April 15th, excuse me, but currently it's on automatic extension, which brings us to our first point. It's currently on automatic extension through October 15th, but they can modify that at any time. So each year around, March or so, February, March, you should check in and make sure if you have the annual FBAR reporting requirement that it's still an automatic extension, and if not, if they've created any mechanism to apply for an extension. Technically, it's not a tax form, it's a FinCEN form, so technically form 4868 or 7004 is not something that would ordinarily be used. FBAR involves lots of different types of accounts. It's not just your bank savings or current account. It includes things like investment accounts, pooled fund accounts like mutual funds and ETFs, life insurance that has a surrender value, and there are lots of different potential items. In order to determine who has to file, the key ingredient is U.S. person. U.S. person does not just mean individual, and it doesn't just mean U.S. citizen. When it comes to individuals, there's typically three categories of filers. There's a U.S. citizen, a lawful permanent resident, green card holder, or a foreign national who meets the substantial presence test. If you fall into any of these categories, you have to file the FBAR whether or not you live in the U.S. or abroad, and whether or not, for example, if you made a treaty election to be treated as a foreign person. In the most recent publication updated by the IRS in March 2022, publication 5569 provides examples. You don't get to avoid, unfortunately, the FBAR just by claiming that you should be treated as a non-resident for tax purposes under a treaty. It's not just limited to individuals, as I mentioned, it's also domestic entities, trusts, certain estates. They're also required to file as well. So, first point, if you're a U.S. person, then you may have to file the FBAR if you have foreign accounts sufficient to exceed the threshold, which is currently more than $10,000 USD on any given day of the year. Things to consider when filing the FBAR. One is the treaty election that I just mentioned, and it's important because people think, oh, I live overseas, I'm in a treaty country, I filed the 8833, I'm going to file an NR, non-resident return instead of a U.S. return. You still have to file the FBAR. Now, if you're filing a 1040 NR instead of a 1040, you may not have to file Form 8938 because that's associated with the 1040 form for residents, not for U.S. residents for tax purposes. It doesn't mean you just live in the U.S. Non-residents is a 1040 NR, but that's something separate. If a non-U.S. person elects to be treated as a U.S. person for tax purposes, the converse or the inverse is true, which is that doesn't mean you have to file the FBAR in order to keep it nice and confusing, right? If you're a U.S. person and then you make a treaty election to be treated as a foreign person, you still have to file the FBAR. If you're a non-U.S. person and you make an election to be treated as a U.S. person for tax purposes, that doesn't mean that you're a U.S. person for FBAR reporting requirements as well. Typically, you see it as like a 6013G election. If you missed filing in prior years, you want to avoid just going up and filing in the current year because that's considered a quiet disclosure. And while the IRS can issue lots of different fines and penalties, they also have various amnesty programs to safely get you into compliance. Almost always better than doing a quiet disclosure. If you do a quiet disclosure and you get busted, you could be on the receiving end of a criminal investigation. And not trying to scare you, it's just the IRS has basically said, hey, if they catch you in a quiet disclosure, an intentional one, then you're intentionally seeking to avoid paying penalty and possibly tax, which means you're intentionally seeking to avoid the penalty, and they see that as something that could potentially be quasi-criminal and refer it to the special agents to conduct an investigation. If you're out of compliance with prior years, there's lots of programs available. If you're willful, you do the voluntary disclosure program, technically VDP, which is for both domestic and offshore. If you're non-willful, there's various other options. There's the streamlined procedures, reasonable cause, and the delinquency procedures. We have lots of free information available on our main website and our sub-websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if you think it's appropriate and something that we handle here. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.